all to this offsite side event during the 59th session of the Human Rights Council. Today's session is about advancing protection and inclusion of LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers through refugee-led response. My name is Artemis Akbari. I'm the Executive Director of the Afghanistan LGBTIQ organization based in the Czech Republic, and I'm so honored to moderate today's session. Around the world, LGBTIQ refugees and LGBTIQ people are forcibly displaced by criminalization, gender-based violence, systematic discrimination, and state persecution. Whether from Afghanistan, Uganda, Chechnya, Sudan, Iraq, Syria, we are forced to flee not only for safety, but also to reclaim our dignity and identity. Yet amidst displacement, our communities are not silent. LGBTIQ refugee-led organizations are doing transformative work, building support system, leading advocacy, and challenging exclusion. They are not just beneficiaries of aid, but they are experts in protection, resilience, and change-making. However, their efforts are increasingly under threat. We face shrinking humanitarian space, the rise of anti-gender movements, and critical funding cuts, including from major donors such as USAID. These challenges endanger the very organizations that are best positioned to respond. In this context, we are warmly welcome and celebrate the recent report by the UN independent expert Graeme Reid, presented at the Human Rights Council last week on Friday. This report, dedicated focus on LGBTIQ plus forced displacement, is a landmark moment. It uplifts our voices, validates our realities, and offers concrete recommendations and actions. Today's discussion brings together powerful voices from the UN, grassroots movements, and regional advocacy and research. And today, we are going to explore how we can move from recognition to resources, and from recommendations to action. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Graeme Reid, the UN independent expert on SOGI. We have Dr. Shirin Heidari, from the Liminality Research Consortium at Geneva Graduate Institute. We have Dr. Renée Dixon, from the Forcibly Displaced People Network, FDPN, and we have Ryan from Equal Asia Foundation. Thank you so much, everyone. So I want to start my first question from Graeme. Graeme, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for your vital and timely report. So, Graeme, what are the key takeaways from your recent report on LGBTIQ plus forced displaced people? And in practical terms, how the member states can support LGBTIQ refugee-led organizations meaningfully, especially right now we have these funding cuts, and it impacted LGBTIQ refugee-led organizations, civil societies, even the UN agencies. How we can ensure that that the refugee-led response remains vital and supported. Thank you so much, Marty.
Thank you. And thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel today. I would say that some of the, I think you're asking basically two questions. What are the kind of key elements within the report, and then state support? And I'm going to talk about that in the latter part in two ways. So firstly, I think that what the report shows in some ways is not surprising, is that the very factors that that impact LGBT communities around the world in terms of the focus of the mandate that I occupy around violence and discrimination are both the drivers of displacement and then shape the experience of displacement. So I would say that that would be the kind of Twitter version of the, or what's it, X version of the report, is that that relationship between those two experiences. Now, of course, this takes place in a context of enormous forced displacement around the world. And the figure that's quoted at the beginning of the report is some 122 million are forcibly displaced. So it seems to me that this is a topic that is of general concern, and then there's a specific aspect of it that is particular to specific communities, and that, of course, is the focus of the report. And the opening paragraph talks about that double bind, is that there's this increased xenophobic rhetoric around the world, and anti-immigrant sentiments that are often expressed in many parts of the world, and that's also coupled with a hostility directed specifically at LGBT people. I've focused on the kind of rise of political rhetoric that seeks to demonize minorities, and that very often includes LGBT people in that form of demonization. And the form of that demonization very often is expressed in terms of that somehow LGBT people represent a threat to the family, to children, is often used as a kind of justification for repressive and restrictive legislation. And then the extension of that becomes that kind of LGBT people represent some sort of a threat to the nation. So what the report suggests is that this rising rhetoric, increased repressive legislation are some of the drivers of displacement. And it's very often the case that that kind of legislation and that hostile rhetoric leads to social situations in which LGBT people increasingly feel the need to leave, or indeed are compelled to leave by the direct experience of violence that's often associated with those very hostile environments. So these are some of the kinds of drivers of displacement, and then the report highlights the particular vulnerabilities that LGBT people face both in transit and then the challenges and difficulties of integrating within host countries, whether those are transit countries or countries of permanent resettlement. And that very often the kinds of challenges and difficulties that they face and that led to their displacement in the first place are reproduced in the countries in which they find themselves, particularly if those are transit countries which may also have laws that criminalize, for example, consensual same-sex conduct, or have other pieces of legislation that are discriminatory. And then the other vital takeaway from the report is that very often, for very good reason and necessary reason, is the most affected communities are very often invisible, and their experience is therefore silenced. And the invisibility is directly related to the hostile social, political, and legal environment in which people find themselves, in which they're unable to express themselves, also from fear of family rejection or social rejection. So the kinds of networks of support that many other forcibly displaced people rely on are not available to LGBT people. Not only are they often not available, but the sources of support can be actually the basis of hostility towards them. So family rejection or social rejection that places people, LGBT people, in a particularly vulnerable position. And I think throughout all of this, that the absolutely vital role of civil society organizations is highlighted throughout the report, both in terms of, and I'm coming to the state support point, is that the civil society organizations very often are at the forefront of attempting to make the social, political, and legal environment more conducive for LGBT people to be able to stay in their countries of origin. So advocating against, for example, legislation that criminalizes consensual same-sex conduct or other forms of discriminatory legislation. And I think here it's important just to pause for a moment and to reflect on just how much progress has in fact been made in many parts of the world over the past decades. Because I think one often loses sight of that in the midst of what are really intractable crises and difficult and challenging situations. So, civil society organizations play that role. They also play a critical role in terms of supporting LGBT people as they flee from dangerous situations, and certainly in terms of the possibilities of integration within a host country. Another element that's highlighted in the report is the lack of accurate data, and this is very often because people are afraid to, again for good reason, to disclose their identities, and so very often data is absent or inadequate, and civil society organizations working together with UN agencies and where possible state entities play a very vital role in terms of addressing that gap. So that brings me to what can states do. I think that one of the primary elements of this would be to support civil society organizations in a really substantive way to recognize that civil society organizations, particularly LGBT-led and refugee-led organizations, are very well placed to do the necessary training of officials, for example, to bridge those protection gaps that are identified in the report, and to address, as I mentioned, the kind of data gap. So those are some of the ways in which the civil society organizations can be supported by the state. And then the other critical point that you alluded to is that this all takes place in an environment in which there are increasingly less resources and very dramatic cuts in funding cuts. And so support from states for civil society organizations, recognizing them as an indispensable part of supporting forcibly displaced people based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graeme. Thank you. I want to highlight one part of your speech that you mentioned about the usually LGBTIQ people, they cannot disclose your identity, and it's really true because I lived in different countries and I work with different LGBTIQ people, especially in Turkey and Iran, and usually most of the most of the refugees and asylum seekers, they are based in developing countries such as Iran. And I know, based on my experience, there are many Syrian and Afghans and Pakistani LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers in Iran. But we have the UN agency like UNHCR, but unfortunately because of those stigma, taboos, and also the government's persecution, state persecution, they cannot disclose their identity based on sexual orientation and gender identity. They cannot ask for asylum because of that. And it's another challenge that they have during their asylum process. Or in Turkey, we have the same situation, that LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers, they usually try to hide their gender identity and sexual orientation, and they ask for asylum for different reasons. And because of that, their asylum case usually have been rejected. So thank you so much, Graeme, for highlighting this issue. Ryan, my second question is for you. In the independent experts report, we have a detailed recommendations and action and call to actions. How this report can help LGBTQ refugee-led organizations, how they can advance their work on the ground in transit countries or in host countries.
Thanks, Artem. It's really good to see a lot of familiar faces and old and new friends here today. My name is Ryan Figueredo. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the founder and executive director of Equal Foundation, based in Bangkok, but we work in the region. And of course, we engage with stakeholders globally as well, like we're doing here today. Thank you, Graeme, for giving us the opportunity to contribute to this report and to share some of our reflections as an organization based in Thailand, which is a transit country for many LGBT refugees. Thailand is a strange beast. It is this haven, perceived haven for LGBTI people, yet it's not a signatory to the Refugee Convention. So this strange contradiction exists as a lot of LGBT people who are displaced see Thailand as a place of refuge, but yet once they move to Thailand, they have a very different experience. I think the report is really important for us because it demonstrates that displacement affects everybody, but it does not affect everybody equally. For LGBTI persons, displacement is often shaped by this double burden. Being LGBTI affects why and how people are displaced. Many flee just not armed conflict or political repression, but also criminalization, gender-based violence, family rejection, and state-sponsored persecution based on their SOGI SE. These are distinct and compounded drivers of forced migration that do not always align with the traditional refugee frameworks. And so this, I think, is really kind of mapped out very well in the report. Secondly, displacement itself affects LGBTI people very differently. Once on the move, LGBTIQ people face abuse in detention, targeted violence in camps, barriers to healthcare and employment, and even invisibility within the protection systems that are meant to take care of them, but also in the LGBTI movement itself. So I think this is something that, as people who are responding to this this ongoing crisis need to be really kind of keenly aware of. This brings me to Thailand, and I think it's really important to understand the importance of countries like Thailand and Malaysia that are seen as places where LGBTI persons from all over the region, but also increasing now from Russia, from Ukraine, from the Middle East, find Thailand has a very low barrier to entry into the country. But once they're there, they begin to experience these multiple and intersecting vulnerabilities. And I think the biggest takeaway from us is how do we kind of focus on countries like Thailand and Malaysia to really build the capacity of protection systems so that they can take care of LGBTI forcibly displaced persons. We have worked very closely with a lot of LGBTI individuals, led community research, supported peer networks, and convened regional stakeholder meetings. And what we're seeing is very clear. People are not just passing through, many are stuck. And this being stuck has so many different dimensions to it. So they're not stuck legally, but they're also stuck, I think, emotionally, psychologically, and this really impacts them in very different ways that we're still trying to kind of unpack and find out what that really means for us as LGBTI organizations working on this issue. So we're really trying to advocate for this roots-based approach, one that recognizes the full experience of their migration journey, not just origin and destination. It calls for like a targeted investment in transit countries, of course, but also kind of maps out where the risks are along that journey and seeing how we can, in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation, we can kind of actually work with other organizations all across that journey. Now, of course, what Graeme said was really important. This requires data, it requires donor attention, but also looking at local legal context and seeing where it is that risks are presented to LGBTI persons on the move. I think it's really important for us as a recommendation to stop seeing transit countries as a waiting room. That is a very lazy way of looking at it. It must really be resourced properly, and that's the ask I feel that we have to kind of really push for. And looking at countries like Thailand that can become not only places where our siblings can go and rest from the threat that they're experiencing, but also to become sites of connection, of safety, and of resilience, not just of passage. So that transit word needs to be reimagined, just to be a place where they can kind of experience community and joy. I think there is this, of course, the recommendations, there is a moral imperative of this report. We should stop seeing LGBTI displaced people as needing saving and start seeing this work as part of our movement's healing. Their displacement is not just their crisis, it's a rupture of our shared struggle. Responding is just not a good thing to do, it is the right thing to do. It is solidarity in practice. And I think we really need to begin to address this in order to kind of reclaim our collective future. So that's my intervention for now. Thank you, Artemis.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you. Renée, my next question is for you. Renée, we have many challenges right now globally. We have the anti-gender movements, we have the cutting of fundings. There are many issues with LGBTIQ for displaced people in Indo-Pacific region. But I want to ask you that how LGBTQ refugee-led organization can achieve and can contribute to achieving systematic change, and what are the pressing gaps right now? Over to you, Renée.
Thank you so much. Humor, that's the word welcome from the lens of Nanwal and Camille lens, where I found safety. Sovereignty was never ceded. I live in a stolen land, and I'm from Australia. And I welcome every Indigenous or a person who is here today, and I acknowledge the dispossession you continue to experience in your Indigenous lands. I also want to acknowledge every LGBTIQ elders who paved the way that we can have independent expert who's talking and advocating in our behalf in UN level. And everyone, and think also about everyone who is stuck in a safe situation and will never be resettled. and mourn those whose names we will never know, because they're invisible, they're erased. And to respond to your question, I want to read the quote from Alison Jagger. She said, "We can only start from where we are. We have been created in a cruelly racist, capitalist, male-dominated society that has shaped our bodies, our minds, our perceptions, our values, our emotions, our language, and our systems of knowledge." UNHCR system was never built in mind with the lives like us. The first documents about how to assess LGBTIQ claims when it was in 2000. The convention exists for so many years. So talking about what gave me a question, what is the role? Coming back to the this quote from Alison Jagger, I have seen times and times again when well-intentioned people trying to address LGBTIQ gaps and their tasks with developing frameworks or programs or policies, because they don't have lived experience, they're failing us again, because they cannot comprehend, they cannot know what we went through, how systems are work, and when they're creating these forums of engagement and consultations, they often invite people who actually can exploit us, sexually harass us, and it's again becoming unsafe space for our community members to talk about the issues. It's again reiterating that the systems are systemically neglecting and failing our lives. So in the report that, and also in the previous document that was developed by UNHCR in 2021, roundtable in your report, I can see the conflation of LGBTIQ work and LGBTIQ refugee-led work. But there is a massive difference between two. Unfortunately, in LGBTIQ work, I went this year to Thailand, Malaysia, and Nepal, and talked to the community members, talked to LGBTIQ refugee-led organization, and asked them, so how do you support LGBTIQ refugee-led, like LGBTIQ refugees? And they're saying, we don't have money for this. And this illusion that big countries give money for LGBTIQ work and it will automatically include displaced people. But that's not the case. If we will look at the report of GPP in 2022-2023, we could see that on Asia Pacific, on the whole region, from $200-something billion, was giving on less than 1% to the work of migrants and refugees, which is, to put in the numbers, it's less than 49,000 for the whole region for LGBTIQ refugees, which is holding so many people. So to your question, recent cuts, they're not recent. They was for us since the beginning. We were disregarded, we were ignored. Now, thankfully, with UNHCR and meaningful refugee participation, they start paying attention and investment to LGBTIQ refugee-led work, or refugee-led. But unfortunately, it's not working, and now we're still like, oh, it's everything bad. I'm sorry, but there's nothing new in the report. It's important to have it. It will help us to advocate, but for us, it's an old story. And we are not doing projects or work because it's a good thing to do because you got money from the grant or from the donor. We're doing this work because it's important. We know that's the right thing to do, and our community members and lives depends on it. While for institutionalized LGBTIQ organization, it will not be the case in many things. Also, we need to address systemic racism, especially in Australia, against LGBTIQ people or people of color. It's very live. So, give me a second. What's the difference between us and LGBTIQ organization? We have a trust and accountability, and we know how to get through some barriers to achieve support and provide these safe spaces. And refugee-led organizations still treat it as a box-ticking exercise because it looks good. You will be invited at the last minute if you will say the right things. You will be invited and open the door if you will be liked. But if you're saying something uncomfortable, which is not sitting well with you, you will be never at the table. And you ask, what are the priorities? How you can priorities if the system is messed up and you don't know where to start? And I would say that the difference is that the refugee-led organizations, they have an understanding what's failing them in policies. We're building our advice and solutions on evidence-based, and we continue to bridge these gaps. But the gatekeepers don't want to share their power and knowledge and connections. So it's okay, we'll get through this. I analyzed all of the statements by the states after your report, and it was fascinating to see that so many questions was about data, and another question was, what is the best practices? At this time, we have kind of the way to go, what was has been done by Canadian government and the civil society organization. Can we say that's a best practice? No and no. It's a way to go. There's something to learn from. But you should not use lack of data as an excuse not to act. Because silence harbors meaning. Silence is a knowledge. And you already have a lot of good recommendations, and you can see that in every area of the life, people are failed. And you can start somewhere where you start feeling comfortable that you know that something needs to be done. And the last point, start creating and working and delivering your own try and error, and find these ways how you can do these best practices. Because the best practices, it's not one size fits all. It will be different in a different context. What works in Canada will not work entirely, and it needs to be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renée. You highlighted different points, and I want to add to what you said. In my perspective, one of the ways to systematic change is the inclusion of LGBTI people in decision making. I was refugee in many countries, and I saw that there were many international organizations or refugee organizations that they were providing services to LGBTIQ people. Even in the Czech Republic, we have some organizations like this that they have projects for LGBTI refugees. But when you see the structure, you notice that none of these staffs are refugees, or none of them are LGBT. If they have a refugee staffs, none of them are LGBT refugees. Because of that, they don't know the gaps, the challenges. And because of that, we have all these issues. And I think consultation is not enough. Sometimes it's very important to work with the community. We should bring them in our work during our projects, in our institutions, work with them, hear from them, and we should create a safe space for them so they can freely speak with you. Sure.
Consultation is not enough.
Of course.
It needs to be investment, commitment, because the systemic change takes time. Exactly. And if you come to the consultation, you give it $50 for the consultation, and off you go. That's exploitation. You continue to exploit people who educate you, who's suffering, who giving you their expertise and knowledge, and you just continue to build these safe, comfortable lives and go home after your clock off finished. We don't have this luxury. We continue to be waking up at middle of the night and trying to save people and try to organize the support.
Thank you so much for that. Exactly, consultation is not enough, because refugee-led organizations, they usually answer the calls even in the midnight, after the working hours, because they are usually activists. They had this lived experience and they know how a refugee person went through these whole during their journey, or how do they feel during when they are in trouble. And because of that, there is a difference between a refugee-led organization, LGBTQ refugee-led organization, and a general organization. So it's very important to give them more agency, more power, include them in decision making. And I think the systematic change starts from here, to work with them and include them in decision making. And also I want to say that the best practices, because as you said, some of the questions were about the best practices. I think the LGBTIQ refugee organization, they know the best practices, because they went through the whole process. They know the gaps, they know the shortcomings, they know everything. And I think it's very important to work with them and learn the best practices from them. And also regarding my previous question, I want to, about how we can use this report to advance our work on the ground. I think this report was very critical and important, because we can use it as a tool for systematic change, for our advocacy work. As you know, the UN spaces are not always LGBTQ inclusive. We have many challenges. We don't have any resolution at the Security Council about LGBTIQ people. We have only 2 resolutions at the General Assembly that contains SOGI language. And I think we have a very long way. But on the other hand, as yesterday also Graeme said, that we should also talk about the advances that we have. And I think one of the advances that we had at the Human Rights Council was this report. And thank you so much, Graeme. And I hope we can use the recommendations for our advocacy work, and I hope the member states and the stakeholders will turn these recommendations, detailed recommendations, into action. So, Shirin, thank you so much for your patience. My last question is for you. As Renée mentioned, most of the member states at the Human Rights Council asked about how we can do the data collection in a safe and secure way. And my question for you is that how can we do the data collection in a way that the community will be safe and secure, and it will be ethically? And more importantly, how we can center the lived experience of LGBTIQ people during the data collection or research to avoid dehumanization of our community. Over to you, Shirin.
Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Since I am actually a researcher at the Graduate Institute, I would like to also extend my warm welcome for you to come here this morning, and very much a great thank to Artemis and the colleagues for really organizing this important topic and important event as well. I'm also having the pleasure to co-chair the advisory group of the Liminality Research Consortium with Artemis. And just to mention that in our previous research and our current research, our previous research was specifically on survival strategies across 6 different countries, and including across the sexuality and gender spectrum. And a lot of the issues, the drivers and the challenges that Graeme included in his report very much resonates with the data that we have. So again, yes, your report might not be surprising, but I think it always helps for that to come out in a formal UN report and deliver to the member state that might not always take the effort or attempts to read academic publications. So in that sense, thank you so much for that. When it comes to data, I would like us to maybe challenge a little bit ourselves with regard to what do we mean with data. I think we're all using data extremely kind of casually. Everybody talks about data is power, data is important, but we really never define what data is. And we always assume that data is also very objective and neutral, which is really not the case. Data is extremely biased and extremely subjective, depending on who is collecting data, what data is being collected, how it's being used, who owns it, how it's reported. All of those shapes the way that data are informing our body of evidence and the evidence that is used for various kind of, again, purposes. And in the current political climate in particular, when there is so much attack on research independence and integrity, obviously any data coming out right now with huge funding cuts, disruption in the research grants, efforts to halt publications, intimidating researchers, and so on and so forth, will obviously lead to even more biased research and evidence, which for me is absolutely critical and very much concerning, because by kind of eliminating generation of complex and nuanced evidence, there is an attempt to erase the experiences of people and the populations. And when that is done, then we know where that ends. So data, in my view, is a little bit of a double-edged sword these days. On one hand, it is absolutely important to collect the data, generate the data, create a nuanced understanding of the diversity of experiences that the queer refugees face. At the same time, it's utterly important in the current climate to ensure their safety and minimizing any risk with, again, a growing number of countries either threatening or planning to introduce anti-LGBT legislation, as well as mentioned, increasing kind of xenophobia across the countries as well. One more thing that I would like to add is also that data, not only that it's subjective, it's not limited to quantitative data and numbers. I think we really need to take the opportunity to go beyond the binaries of cis trans and gay and straight, and who's refugee and who is not. The world is more complex. The world is messy, and so is the data. So we need to also rely a lot on different way of data. Complexities can be captured by qualitative data. They're not always captured by quantitative data. Really bringing, again, at the heart of these evidence generations, the voices and expertise and experiences of the queer refugees in all their diversities. Another point that I really want to make, that we cannot and we should not treat the LGBTQ, and that's a term I actually dislike, because it's really categorizing people as if people are just belonging to one category. Experiences, which is very diverse, and in our research as well, there is additional invisibilities within the queer community as well. In our research, we interviewed 200 people, and all of those, we only managed to reach 2 lesbians, for instance, or very few trans men. Again, we have major amount of violence that we observe in that data against trans women, against non-binary people. Gay men experience particular challenges. So really understanding the diversity of experiences without treating that community as one is really, really important. And also, we do need to work more closely together. I think we all work extremely in silos, with academia doing their own thing, and civil society doing their own thing, and member states and UN agencies. And I think there needs to be much more collaboration across the sectors. And in an effort, in our humble effort to try to bridge these kind of disconnects, we established in our research the Liminality Research Consortium, and also the Liminality Research Advocacy Policy Coalition, understanding that we can only do research from the outset, defining those research questions together with the affected community, so we know it actually speaks to their lived experiences, it is reflecting the needs or the evidence gaps, but at the same time also engaging civil society and UN organizations to know that the evidence that is being generated is also meaningful to really drive change at the policy and programmatic level. So really working together along the way to also address all the potential ethical aspects and logistical aspects that obviously we are facing a lot of those these days in terms of how to conduct safe and ethical research that really captures those diversities without putting people at risk, both the researchers as well as the affected population. So again, I don't have any answer, Artemis. I just think that it's a time for us to also really reflect beyond what these data means, at a time when data can also be extremely sensitive in terms of how it can be abused by again, different powers, and maybe really relying on also working with communities, working with collaborative efforts to research, to collect the data through other means than just this, administrative data collected by certain agencies or member states. Because ensuring that we are documenting the diversity of experiences and also the impact of these rapidly political humanitarian changes that we see on the lived experiences is critical. And one last thing, I will stop afterwards, is we always talk about like identities and vulnerabilities, but I really want to highlight that it's not the identities that create vulnerability. It is the structural factors, it's the positions and the conditions that people find themselves in that makes them at the risk of violence, not because they're gay or lesbian or trans or refugees or any of those things. And I think the research should also be more mindful about how we are framing those aspects, that it is a system we need to change. The asylum procedures, the migration policies, the humanitarian aid as well, with all good intention, they're also reproducing and recreating the same gender hierarchies, including through the vulnerability assessments and different ways of looking at who is vulnerable, who is not, who is prioritized and who is not, who is resettled, who is not. And I think we do really need to kind of go beyond those very institutionalized binaries.
Can I add something to this?
Yes,
Sure.
We often want to collect data. We're expected to present data to justify the amount of people, the value of the life, the scale of the issue. But anti-gender organizations, they do not operate in these terms. From the report, again, sorry, my autistic personality, last report, 3 anti-LGBTIQ organizations in 1 year received $1 billion, and 8,000+ LGBTIQ organizations received $905 million. Yeah, so the disparity is just unbreachable. And while you're waiting some data to think what can be done and reach, people are dying, while other one is going to Geneva and professionalize UN movements where they're coming, erasing us in every possible level. That people think, can they support you, or their logo will juxtapose their efforts and attempts to actually support the issue or to do it. So this erasure, omission, irrelevance is really affecting our lives, and you should stop waiting for the data. You have plenty. In Australia, we did the research, we presented the data, and we heard, oh, it's confronting. Because it's a very bad situation for people who is resettled to Australia. They don't have support adequate. They experience discrimination in every area of their life. We developed the roadmap to action. Take this recommendation, implement. Do you think someone is doing something? No. We're hearing lip service that yes, LGBTIQ should be supported, but we don't have and don't see the actions that will follow them.
Thank you, Renée, and thank you, Shirin. I think I want to echo Shirin that we should go beyond the categories and numbers. Usually, in my perspective, some researchers and reports, they dehumanize the lived experiences of the community with numbers. I think sometimes our lived experience is the data, and I think we shouldn't wait for years for more researches and more reports, because people are expecting us to do something, to take concrete actions to support them. To be honest, sometimes it's very heartbreaking, and I talked about this with our colleagues yesterday. That's why we are here in Geneva, and we are speaking at the Human Rights Council, and my colleague described it as a political theater. There are people that they are dying. In Iran right now, we have many LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers from Afghanistan and Pakistan, but we cannot send cash assistance to them because of the US and EU sanction. In Pakistan, the same. Last year, one transgender woman was killed in Pakistan. Right now, there are 400 LGBTIQ asylum seekers from Afghanistan, and they received invitation from Germany. They have been accepted to come to Germany, but because of the change of government, they cannot come, and they are in danger of deportation. I think we should take concrete actions. I think our lived experiences are data. And the other thing is that I want to add to the data collection is that sometimes researchers or organizations, they do the data collection with this Western perspective, but it's wrong. For example, there was a research organization, I don't want to name them, but they wanted to do data collection and do interviews with LGBTI people from Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iran. And they were asking, one of the first questions, which part of the LGBTIQ plus people are you from? But the problem is that many LGBTIQ community, the queer community in Afghanistan, they don't use the term LGBT or gay, lesbian. We have our own terminologies. We have Isaac, we have Maurat, or in South Asia, we have Hijra community. Last year, I think Shirin and her colleagues, they organized a conference in Greece, Athens. And I remember there was a lawyer from Zurich that one of her clients was a Hijra person, and she was rejected because she identified as a Hijra in Zurich. And I think we should accept these diversities when we are doing this data collection work and research, and we should know the local context, languages, and terminologies to capture the reality. So I talked a lot as a moderator, and thank you so much, our panelists. Thank you for your contributions. Now I want to open the floor for questions or comments. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hands and briefly introduce yourself. I can take 3 questions for now.
And it's a safe space.
Yes. Okay, we can start from Sizbe and then you know, Sizbe, over to you. We have mics here.
Thank you. I think it's just to piggyback on the data collection question. I work with Rainbow Railroad and we focus on human mobility, mostly queer folks within displacement and within that space. But I had a quick question about data collection. A lot of people who don't support us, who don't see us as human beings, are collecting our data in innovative ways with emerging technologies. And they're collecting data. And I'm wondering, as researchers or things that you have seen in the field, how do we leverage people within the community? Because as you mentioned, our approaches are maybe very stoic or archaic. And are there innovative ways where we can leverage the same tools that they use against us to actually collect our own data in a more resilient form? And have you seen that type of data collection in different ways? Like, that's what I was wondering. That's my question, please.
I think the suggestion, do you want to collect all questions? Or?
Yes, I will collect 3 questions.
Thank you so much. I'll just make a quick couple of comments as well, and then ask a question. So my name's David Gardley. I'm the DPR at the Australian mission here, and we're really pleased to be co-sponsoring the event today. And just a big thank you to all the co-organisers of this. I think it's been a really valuable dialogue. We thank the independent expert again for the critical report. As we said the other day in the HRC itself, we're deeply concerned by these findings, which have been reinforced by the panel members today. And as we said in our statement, the normalisation of discrimination and violence against LGBTQIA+ persons is to the detriment of human rights and fundamental freedoms of every person. So that's why advocating for the equal rights of LGBTQIA+ people internationally is a human rights priority for Australia. To Graeme's point actually about state actions that can help, we're also supporting LGBTQIA+ civil society internationally through Australia's Inclusion and Equality Fund. We were among the first states to support civil society efforts to join the Refugee Participation Pledge at the Global Refugee Forum in 2019 with Denmark, Canada, Netherlands. And committed, to your point as well, Artemis, to supporting the meaningful participation of refugees and displaced people in decisions that affect their lives, taking into account diversity within communities. So now with record numbers of people displaced, that pledge has grown in relevance and importance. And we've seen increasing interest in it, in signatories from UN agencies, NGOs, etc. We're really happy to be helping to drive that momentum and have worked to better incorporate the refugee lived experience in our humanitarian policy development, responses to refugee crises and engagement with the international protection system. And we're going to continue doing that to advance refugee participation, to ensure initiatives that we have are more inclusive, safe, efficient and respectful of the rights and dignity of those who are displaced, including supporting the work of refugee leaders, such as through the Australian Refugee Advisory Panel, where Dr. Renée Dixon is a highly valued member, and also advancing Australia's pledges made at the Global Refugee Forum. So, under the humanitarian program, we prioritise visa applicants who are outside of their home country and are members of identified minority groups, including LGBTQIA+ people, who are referred by UNHCR or proposed by a family member in Australia. And the settlement programs and services take into consideration the specific needs of refugees and humanitarian migrants, including LGBTQIA+ clients. So just a thank you again for all the ongoing commitment to promoting greater inclusion in humanitarian policies and practice. Hopefully that sketch of how we approach the issue is helpful. I think today Dr. Shirin, Dr. Renée, Artemis, really everyone touched compellingly on this question of data and really anticipated my question about data and good practices. We recognise that ensuring individual safety in data collection is of paramount importance, and I think the reflections on the topic today, including about lived experience, they're useful inputs for us and our colleagues back in Canberra, so thank you again for that. Given that question was answered, the other one I'm interested to ask about is on the SOGI HRC dialogue and your analysis of it. I mean, we know that a broad cross-regional group of states achieving a aligned set of views around these issues is really crucial. You know, when we're thinking about the refugees situation, we've got host countries, we've got pre-settlement countries, we have, you know, that broad cross-regional group all has different roles to play. So it's interesting to know whether your analysis of the dialogue the other day revealed any trends in that regard as well, whether we're sort of heading in a positive direction in terms of that broad cross-regional group of states that will really help achieve change. So thank you again for the opportunity to participate, to co-sponsor the event today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Cyrus Sanjar. I'm a former member of the European Parliament, currently based here in Geneva. When I was a member of the European Parliament, I had worked on the LGBTIQ freedom zone for Europe to be a freedom zone for LGBTIQ people. And during that time, when I was rapporteur of this resolution, I was contacted by a number of people from across the globe, many of them coming from countries where they needed to escape from. And one of these people who spoke to me was from Yemen. His name is Kosan, and he had his story, to me, was shocking when I learned what he was going through, etc., and that he could turn to no one for help. And he turned to us as members of the European Parliament to try and get him out of Yemen and the torture, literal torture that he was going through. It was very difficult since there were no flights out of Yemen for a very long time, but as soon as the airport started operating again with flights to Egypt, we managed to put him on a flight to Egypt, only to realize that he's now in a country which is very hostile towards LGBTIQ people as well, but at least for him it was a couple of levels less torturous than where he was before. My question is, I mean, we got him out of Yemen a couple of years ago now, but for a whole 2 years, he was afraid to go to the UN agency in Cairo to seek help, to seek refuge. In fact, he ended up sleeping on the streets in Cairo. We paid for him to have a room for some time. Obviously, it was impossible for him to find a job since he is not even recognized as being in Cairo. And he was literally afraid to go to the UN agency. Why? Because for him, obviously he could not fathom the idea that someone would be able to accept him as he is. So that is one of the first problems that he had. But apart from that, every time he went close to the building, he realized that security, there were people whom he then would see in the streets. He was afraid of what their reaction would be once he goes inside and tells whoever that he is a gay man fleeing torture in Yemen. So my question is, how can we push, and obviously the report is very important in the sense, but how can we inform, make it clear to such people that entering the UN agency building is a safe space for them? But then my question is it a safe space for them or not?
So over to you. Maybe Shirin.
I talk a lot, so I want someone else. I will be last.
So we have a question about data collection, and also we have a question from the Australian Mission for the Independent Expert, and also a question from our colleagues here. So, Graeme, do you want to start first?
Sure. I think I've really appreciated the kind of nuance around data collection, and clearly that on a superficial level, one is looking for anonymity, security, in some sense accuracy, but you trouble that by saying, actually these are very complicated and people's lives are messy and complicated. And in a sense, the requirement of data is to kind of reduce that into very recognizable terms, and as you point out, the very categories that we use in order to identify people similarly need to be treated lightly, given the realities of everyday life. So I appreciated also that kind of insight into thinking about data collection in all its complexity and what it can do and what it can't do, and some of the challenges around that. I think that the example that you use is very specific about a particular case, of course, can also be generalized, I think, to many people's experience. And in some senses, that's about a lack of knowledge about being able to apply for asylum based on sexual orientation or gender identity. In some instances, it's the fact that very few countries explicitly do that. I think some 37, although that doesn't mean that those are the only countries that would accept, but those that explicitly make it clear that sexual orientation grounds for. So I think in part it's kind of awareness raising, but then I think what you're really pointing to here is the very challenging situation of the kind of gap between official policy and then the sort of granular practices that people perhaps are not aware of, even if the officers themselves are well-meaning or kind of sympathetic, that thinking about who the translator is, who the security guard is the security guard also kind of trained in some way, so that those kinds of day-to-day interactions are kind of addressed, and that's the sort of challenging and more long-term kind of goal. And I think then the question of the sort of analysis of state responses was not necessarily directed to me, but yes, I mean, clearly there have been necessary efforts of expanding the pool of kind of host countries or trans countries and thinking about more middle ground states. And it's not clear to me from the composition of who is present in the room and who's absent. I think that one of the distinctive features of when I present reports, like when I walk into the room, state representatives walk out. And so it's kind of one of the challenges and frustrations of trying to meet with more middle ground states that's emblematic of just how polarized and politicized these issues are at this particular time.
I have one story to share, sorry, I can't hold it, about data collection. I just remember Magnus Hirschfeld. Everyone knows these US-based riots, names of Marsha P. Jones and all that stuff. But we need to remember the name of Magnus Hirschfeld, who was the first man who established the Institute of Sexology in Germany. And he started creating this safe institute where all LGBTIQ people from around Germany came to this institute and have a life. And LGBTIQ people were prosecuted by the police, and he issued the cards from Institute of Sexology that give them a way even to be more free. And when Nazi came, this most amazing and memorable video when they burning the books, it was from his institute. They came first to him. And all of these LGBTIQ people who received these passes to feel free and safe in Germany were taken into concentration camp, and they were killed, all of them. And now in that concentration camp, when the majority of the people were killed, we have only one flag, down, somewhere behind the corner, that there is no fucking way to find if you are like specifically looking for this. Sorry, not polite to me. So that's the downside of collecting the data. You need to think about this. And with the global movement against LGBTIQ people, against women, that's what we're experiencing. So if you want to collect data, how do you collect data? If you're an unfunded LGBTIQ organization or refugee-led organization, you don't have money to store this data safely. We have such a good experienced hackers who can hack you. So how you will think and consider this as well? So that's again, you need to have more money to be able to store the data, that it will be safe and you will not be hacked, you will not be tracked. So it's not the easy question. You need to rely on relationship and invest in relationship and build this relationship. So also you really need to do mechanisms and frameworks with the civil society, with UNHCR, because they are undoubtedly partner. Yes, not all people are trained. It's not compulsory in UNHCR office to be adequate to this. But when you're building the relationship, you can at least reach out and say, I have this case, can you help me? And they would connect you with the person who is doing it well. Also, thank you for helping the person, I really appreciate it. But we need systems and frameworks that is not working for one person, but for as many as we can. Because only 1% of refugees will be resettled, now it's even worse. And to be prioritized for resettlement from refugee UNHCR, you need to have some additional, level of struggle to be identified and prioritized. It's not enough to be just LGBTIQ, but we know it's not good enough.
Thank you, Renée. We don't have enough time, but Shirin, Brian, do you have any concluding remarks? 1 minute each of you.
Yeah. I have feelings, as I'm going to express what I'm feeling. I think data is important for people who are trying to reduce us into things that they can understand, so it's really helpful for people without lived experience. But just listening to this story, for instance, things clicked in my mind, and there was connection immediately made with that person's experience. And I think we need to ask ourselves this question in this room as leaders, as people who are leading the movement. What are we looking for? Are we looking to make our lives easier, or are we looking to connect with these people with lived experience? And I think that's the foundational question. And that can only be answered by actually kind of making spaces available to listen to what these people have to say, and perhaps not empathize at a much more deeper level to kind of move out of that. I need to find out the numbers, I need to be voyeuristic about what exactly did you experience, what kind of violence did you experience. I think that is, it's very voyeuristic, and I feel that does not really form connection, and we're really not able to be effective leaders and kind of really drive change in this space. And I was listening to you, and I don't tire of this famous quote from Gabor Mate. He said, safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. And I think this just explains, if we want to kind of really understand how to move forward, we really need to understand people with lived experience. There's no amount of data, quantitative or qualitative, will give you that the kind of understanding that you require to kind of do this work. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you so much. Just quickly, also, I really want to just at least acknowledge your question. I think with regard to data, I still want us to challenge about when we're talking about data. I think, Renée, I don't think I agree with you. I think you don't, all the data are not necessarily always de-anonymized. You can collect a lot of anonymous data that will be very useful, that even hacked will be meaningless to those who hack it, but will still provide a lot of insight. And I think that's the benefit of collaborating with researchers, because as researchers, we are really trained, but also by institutional policies, very, very important for us to think about all the different ethical issues. We did not collect any personally identifiable information. Even the informed consent was done in the presence of a witness that would sign on behalf of somebody, just to make sure that there is not a single trace that could lead the data to that individual. Nevertheless, those data was crucial to really understand. So I really want us to kind of constantly think about what data are we talking about, for what purpose, and how can we make sure that that data is meaningful for its purpose that we are talking about, yet maintaining that ethical aspect. And just very quickly about the issue, and thank you so much for the European Parliament's experience to be here, which is very important, but I think all those credibility assessments just really highlights that people are not, it's not the first thing you're talking about, disclosing your sexuality, gender identity, and so on and so forth. And it's always in those processes that people become very dehumanized. It becomes a structural violence. And again, all the asylum claims are based on whether people are credible enough, because they didn't disclose immediately upon arrival that, oh my God, I was persecuted by my country or whatever. So I think all of those really important insights for us to rethink the system. And finally, I'm sorry, the colleague's name that asked about the data. This is a very crucial aspect to think about, specifically about how digital data is used, who owns it, who accesses it. It's definitely not a field that I am well knowledgeable about, but I do know a colleague of mine that works specifically on the digital health and human rights, because I think it is a moment where we really need to be very mindful about both the power of the data and all these AI and all those platforms to advance the causes that we're working on, but also very skeptical about all the issues related to the data ownership, the respect for the privacy and confidentiality and minimizing the abuse of data, but I think that's a whole different session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Regarding the last question, quickly I want to say that I think one of the solutions is training these staffs so they can build this trust. It's very important because we documented many cases in countries like Iran or Pakistan. Usually the local staffs of the international organizations, including UNHCR, that we had meeting with them in the past, that they usually, the local staffs or the security guards, that they have ill treatment toward LGBTIQ asylum seekers. And these are the issues that need to be addressed through training, through inclusive training about the community, so they can feel a safe space in the office. When I entered Turkey to ask for asylum, I walked for 2 weeks. I was very tired. I was persecuted in my country, and I was very scared. And when I arrived in the UNHCR office in Ankara, Turkey, and when I was in the room to do the pre-assessment interview, I saw the rainbow flag there, and suddenly I felt that it was my first time in my life that I saw a rainbow flag. Because in Iran we have death penalty, in Afghanistan is torture in prison, and it was my first time, and I felt, oh my God, this place is safe. And I could trust this person, and I talked about my experiences. Even a simple rainbow flag sometimes can build this trust, and I think we should learn these small things and small steps from the community. That's why I emphasized earlier that we should work with them and include them in the decision making. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thanks to all of you for being here. As donors, member states, and institutions, I think it's very important. The call is very clear, I think. Include LGBTIQ refugee-led organizations in the decision-making, partner with them, fund them, and center their voices. Thank you so much.
If I may, with Artemis and other colleagues, we have the Liminality Research Advocacy Policy Coalition, which is again a safe platform where people can join, where we meet for now by twice a year online, just for us to connect and collaborate, bridging the gaps. And anybody has an interest in the intersection of gender, especially to focus on queer and displacement, are welcome to join. Your name will not be displayed on our website, and you can only lend your logo to be part of this if you agree. But this is also a space for us to make sure that we can build synergies and collaborate more closely.
Thank you so much. And also we have teas, pastries,